by the way, thank you, James. I guess late last night, or I'm sorry, a couple days ago, and then I heard back from her last night, but she asked me if I was going to do a talk on racism this morning, because apparently around the country, different UU congregations are discussing Black Lives Matter. And I just want to start this way. If you will, I'm going to kind of put everybody on the spot. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. I just want you to think for a moment about what comes to mind and what emotions come to mind when I say the word rich. Now, mindful of where you went with that word, I want you now to think about the next word in relation to the first word, rich. Okay? So think about the word black. I want you to think about, feel what you're feeling and what you're thinking right now about where I might go next. Because the next word I want you to think about is soil. Rich, black soil. Okay, so if you will, please. I knew the first time I did that exercise, my immediate thoughts were I was embarrassed, frankly, where my thought processes took me from rich and then combining rich and black, and where I went with that, and then to be kind of pulled back when the person said soil, because it wasn't where I went at all. Did you have the same experience? Something similar? Because one of the things I want to talk about this morning is we bring our perceptions, skewed as they are, and our life experiences to any conversation when someone says, let's talk about racism, or sexism, or classism, or ageism, or any of the isms. And certainly as a white male in America, racism, to a large extent, is an abstract for me. I think in general, for many white people, it is an abstract. Black person, brown person, Asian person. What are we even talking about when we attempt to get our hands and minds and hearts around this term? I know once, many years ago, I was in China, and I was in a boat in the Yangtze River, and it was just my friend and me, and there must have been 1,000 other people on that boat, and they were all Chinese, and we weren't. And I remember exploring the ship. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and I walked into the cafeteria, and it was full of people just talking and having a nice evening. And I walked in, and I looked around. I was just trying to get my bearings, and it just went. And for the first time in my life, I felt what it felt like to be the other. And even in that instance, I brought my white privilege to that. And that was my filter. And I have to own that just lasted a few seconds, because I had the ability to turn around and walk out and reconnect with my friend, and I knew I wasn't going to be on that boat for very long, and I knew I was going to be getting on a plane, and I was going to be coming back to Louisiana. So even that brief little instance is just hardly anything more than an abstract experience. So it kind of begs this question: how can any of us talk about racism, particularly white males? How can we talk about racism? It seems to me that we need to listen about racism. And sexism. Now, I've experienced classism, and I'm beginning to experience ageism. And I can talk about that a little bit. But it seems that in our country right now, and maybe for the last 30 or 40 years, there's been a concerted effort to kind of neutralize and minimize what it means to suffer from racism and sexism and classism. So listening about racism, I think one of the most qualified people, is certainly one of the most entertaining and accurate people we could listen to about racism, is Chris Rock. The man is fearless and spot on with his, I guess the way to say it, with his own authenticity. So I looked up some of his quotes about this, and he said, you know, racism in America is not a fad. It's not like a lava lamp or some awful kind of sofa material. It's more like a disease that kills millions of people each year. And we need to talk about it that way. We need to dissect it, and we need to see how to overcome its immune system. And one of the ways that we need to talk about it is just being aware. He was talking about, I didn't see the Oscars, but apparently he caught a lot of heat about some of the comments he made, but he was talking about racism in Hollywood is so subtle. He said it's not like racism. Hollywood racism is more like sorority racism. He said it's kind of like, you know, Rhonda, we really love you, you're just not a Kappa. And so, how real is that? I have not experienced that, but for him to make that brought home for me when I heard that, how often I probably had been guilty of that myself. I can remember sitting in a group one time and someone said, raise your hand if you've ever been violent against gay people. Of course, I had violence against gay people. And then a person had the courage to say, well, I've told jokes. And that's violence. So I have to own that. So many things about my consciousness I have to own that I'm completely unaware of. Chris Rock talked about black on black crime. It's not black on black crime. He said it's poor on poor crime. And we white people need to be willing to listen. Black Lives Matter is a cry of anguish. It's not something to offend us. Yet I'm astounded that so much of our population is absolutely offended by that and want to say, well, white lives matter too, please. How dare we be offended by something that we don't even understand and have never experienced? Just kind of make a guess of what percentage of American population do you think is black? 12. It's more in the 15-16% range. I mean, some of the numbers are as high as 20%, and you hear as low as 12 or 13. Let's just say 15%. 15%, is that surprising to you?
Yeah, I just thought it was more than that.
15% Latino, 12-13%. All total, people of color represent a 40, small in the low 40% range. So it's just helpful to even begin to have that understanding, because it's equally disturbing when you think about the fact that of the 2.2 million men incarcerated in our country, a little bit less than 1 million, but 35 to 40% of those are African American males. And the disproportionate. And so for people to say that, you know, people are being overly sensitive, I mean, the data is there to show the inequity of incarceration rates. So it's an institutional thing. Just as sexism is institutionalized and classism is institutionalized. There's a great book that I read years ago about the use of jail labor in Nashville to do construction around Nashville, but not just construction, private industry work. And the title of the book was One Died, Sent Another. And it was about using African Americans that they had arrested to go out into the labor market. And if you ever want to research what happened in Atlanta with the Coca-Cola company, it's very similar. And we don't even have these conversations because by and large we don't even know about it. We must be willing to hear the stories, and we must be willing to learn. Because I own my own ignorance and my entrenched ways of thinking about this. When I ask you about rich black soil, this is where I went with it. Rich, I thought about money. Black, when I heard this, I thought athlete, I thought entertainer, I thought criminal. Those were my initial thoughts. I don't know if anybody had the same experience, but that is so deeply entrenched and ingrained in the way I've been taught, in the way I grew up. And I have to be aware of that before I can even have any kind of conscientizing experience. It is institutionalized. Chris Rock said, a black C student can't even get a job working as a manager at Burger King. But a white C student can become president of the United States. He was talking about George W. And he made the observation, there are two malls in every town has two malls. The one the white people go to and the ones they used to go to. And if I'm the one going to the new one, I'm not going to the other one. I don't see what that's like. And he said in his neighborhood it was so bad that you could get shot while you were being shot. The idea of what it's like to grow up a different way is so hard for us to make that leap and understand. So again, the conversation about racism or sexism is so very difficult for us to have. I have to plead guilty to the fact that I feel relatively uncomfortable sitting here with you guys here. Honestly, because I feel so inadequate at having this conversation. One of the things Chris Rock said that was so powerful, and the things that I looked up, was he was discussing the Obama presidency. And everybody's made this a big deal about black progress in America. It's not black progress in America. For hundreds of years, there have been very qualified black candidates, or people that have the potential to run the country. This is not progress for blacks. He said it's progress for whites. Those of us that were willing, those of us who recognized intelligence and leadership and potential. But frankly, the last 30 years, 35 years have been very disturbing to me. Because in part, all of this seems to be a concerted effort to kind of not make us more sensitive, but make us less sensitive. One of the things that Chris Rock talked about as far as classism goes, and minimum wage. He said minimum wage, when you're working for someone for minimum wage, what they're really telling you is, I would pay you less if it were not against the law. But it's so prevalent, and it's such a difficult thing in some ways to think out, tease out, and think through. And one of the things that I find most disturbing about what's happened in the last year and a half in our political conversation is there's a whole class of people and thought processes that have been emboldened by some of the things that Donald Trump has said. So I'm really disturbed that in our national conversation now, that the things that I thought were dead, things that I thought were behind us, have been sitting there and simmering all along. It's really disturbing to me to realize. I heard Richard Rohr, Franciscan monk, not long ago on the radio, and he was talking about how it happens with us individually, and it happens in cultures, that we typically move from order to disorder to reorder. So I grew up in a family, and we understand certain things, and there's this kind of false sense of order, and then I leave my family, and I go out into the real world, and I hit the wall, and disorder occurs, and I have to kind of move through it. This is where you see addictions, and you see other things happen here. But as I understand things, and I come out on the other side, I can reorder my life. And he said the same things happen in cultures. You've got this false economy, the slave economy. You've got the false political process. I mean, false belief systems that are really kind of illusory. And then the reality kicks in, and you have disorder. You have people that are dissatisfied. You have all the social and political chaos. And from there, you can move to reorder, where people feel heard. And it's more real. And we own our history, and we move forward in a much healthier progression. And what he said is, what you've got in our country now is half of the population feels the disorder, and then we'll push it back into order. That's the conservative way, to push it back into order and make things fit that don't fit anymore. But their discomfort with the disorder is trying to push them in a way that won't work and it can't last. So instead, the rest of us have to pull toward reorder and hope that we can pull the rest of the people with us. So Chris Rock said, thinking about the Tea Party and the Trumpites and all the things that are going on around the country now, he said, I've got children. And just before you put them to bed, this is when they act up the most. And he said, I'm going to try to believe that that's what this is. That this is the last gasp of an old way. And they're going to misbehave. And we're going to have to endure it. But in time, it will finally go to bed. And we'll be done with it. Maybe so. I hope so. But in the meantime, what do we do? I don't know about you guys, but sometimes it just feels so overwhelming, I don't know what to do. Or the little bitty things I do don't feel enough. So I think in the meantime, we just need to be more aware of our own privilege. We need to be prepared to listen, not just about racism, but sexism too. Something that I can't possibly understand because I've never experienced it in a way that 1/2 of the population has experienced it. And I wouldn't even have known about it if it hadn't been for the fact that women could teach me about it. Racism, sexism, classism, ageism. We need to practice awareness, and when we see it, we need to be willing to speak out. And we need to be willing to listen. I'm going to close with this. Another thing that Chris Rock said is people say that life can be short, that there's no guarantees, that I could get hit by a bus today and it would be all over, so I need to live every day like it's my last day. And he said, not true. Because life is long for most of us. And it's really unlikely any of us are going to get hit by a bus today. In fact, we're in it for the long haul. And the choices we make today about interacting with other people how we live our lives are going to affect us for the next 50 years. So my challenge is for each of us to become more conscientized, to begin to recognize those institutionalized way of thinking that we don't even realize we have. And the only way we learn about them is by willingness to listen, by being honest about what we think, being honestly present to other people, open-minded to hear what they have to say, and willing